Sir, for the last time, get back to your seat. This is a restricted area. Can't you read the sign? Co-pilot Logan Price stood like a bulldog at the cockpit door, his arms crossed over his chest, his jaw set in a line of pure condescension. He was looking at an old man who seemed to have wandered out of a different century. The man's tweed jacket was worn at the elbows. His trousers were simple gray flannel and his face was a road map of wrinkles. But his eyes were a clear, startling blue, and they held a stillness that was deeply unsettling amidst the chaos. The cabin of Transair Flight 7014 was a symphony of terror. A deafening roar from the left side of the aircraft was punctuated by the shrill, insistent blare of alarms. Oxygen masks dangled from the ceiling like grotesque party favors, swaying with every violent lurch of the plane. Passengers were screaming, crying, praying. A young flight attendant, Clara, was trying to maintain a veneer of calm, her voice trembling as she instructed everyone to brace for impact. She saw the old man standing at the cockpit door, and her first instinct was to herd him back to his seat. But then she saw his eyes. While everyone else's face was a mask of panic, his was a study in profound, almost analytical calm. He wasn't looking at the co-pilot. He was listening to the dying airplane. Logan took a step forward, puffing out his chest. "Are you deaf, old-timer? I said sit down. The adults are handling this." The insult hung in the air, thick and ugly. The old man's gaze finally shifted from some distant point in the middle distance and settled on Logan. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply spoke, and his words cut through the noise like a surgeon's scalpel. "Your port engine is in catastrophic failure," the old man said, his voice a low, gravelly hum. "You've lost primary and secondary hydraulics on that side. You're overcompensating with the rudder, and your yoke inputs are too aggressive. In about 90 seconds, you're going to enter a terminal flat spin." Logan's jaw went slack. Every single word was terrifyingly accurate. It was a diagnosis so precise it was as if the old man could see the very soul of the crippled machine. The co-pilot's arrogance, his only shield against the fear that was clawing its way up his throat, curdled into defensive fury. How could you possibly know that? Who the hell are you?" "My name is Samuel Kent," the old man replied, his eyes now boring into Logan's. "And I know that because I can hear it. She's screaming." The plane shuddered again, a gut-wrenching drop that sent a fresh wave of screams through the cabin. Inside the cockpit, the captain, a veteran pilot named Henderson, was slumped over the controls, his face a ghastly shade of gray, a massive heart attack induced by the stress of the initial explosion. Logan was alone. He was 28 years old, top of his class, a prodigy with a bright future. But the manuals, the simulators, none of it had prepared him for this. The plane was fighting him, a wounded beast refusing to be tamed. His hands were slick with sweat on the yoke. He was losing. Clara, the flight attendant, watched the exchange. She had seen Logan's panic before he'd slammed the cockpit door. She saw the beads of sweat on his temple, the slight tremor in his hands, and she saw the impossible calm in Samuel Kent. It wasn't the placidness of senility. It was the focused serenity of a master craftsman observing a problem. She made a decision that would either save them all or cost her career. As Logan was distracted by another alarm, she moved swiftly to the door, her fingers finding the emergency latch. She pulled it. The door clicked open. She looked at Samuel, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "Go," she whispered, a single, decisive breath. Logan spun around as the door opened. "What are you doing? I'll have you arrested!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. He moved to block the entrance, a final, pathetic display of authority. But Samuel Kent moved with a speed that defied his age. It wasn't a young man's explosive quickness, but an old man's economy of motion. A simple sidestep, a slight turn of the shoulder, and he was past Logan, slipping into the cockpit as if he were a ghost passing through a wall. He settled into the captain's seat, his movements fluid and certain. For a moment the world seemed to slow down. Samuel's hands, gnarled with age and mapped with the fine lines of 1,000 repairs, reached out and rested on the yoke. The plastic and metal felt alien, too light, too complex, but the soul of the machine beneath it, that was familiar. He ignored Logan's sputtering rage, the litany of regulations and threats pouring from the young man's mouth. His focus narrowed until the only things that existed were the crippled aircraft and the sky. "Disengage autopilot," Samuel commanded, his voice devoid of any emotion except absolute control. Logan was so stunned he actually complied, his fingers fumbling with the switch. "Manual trim. Now. Divert all auxiliary power to the starboard hydraulics. We need every ounce of pressure we can get." As his fingers wrapped around the yoke, the texture of the worn plastic under his palms triggered something deep within him. The roar of the dying engine faded, replaced by a different sound, a high-pitched, ethereal whine. The cockpit around him dissolved. He was no longer in an Airbus at 27,000 feet. He was strapped into the tight, unforgiving seat of an experimental aircraft, a machine of myth that officially never existed. He was at the edge of space, the sky above him a deep, star-dusted purple, the gentle curve of the earth a breathtaking blue and white jewel below. He was 30 years old again, his body a coiled spring of muscle and reflex. Then, a jolt. A flash of orange light on his port side. An engine had flamed out. The same sickening lurch, the same immediate, violent yaw to the left. His radio intercept officer, a man named Jack, whose face he could no longer clearly recall, spoke into the intercom, his voice a miracle of calm. "Loss of thrust on port engine, Sam. We've got a problem." "Copy that, Jack," he'd replied, his own voice just as steady, his hands already dancing across the controls, fighting the spin, taming the beast. It was just another day at the office. A violent shudder from the Airbus yanked him back to the present. Logan was staring at him, his face a mask of disbelief. "What are you doing? You can't just—" "I am flying the airplane, son," Samuel said, his eyes never leaving the instruments. "Something you were failing to do." He worked the rudder pedals with a deftness that belied his age, using the remaining engine's thrust to counteract the drag from the dead one. It was a delicate, dangerous ballet, balancing on the knife's edge between flight and a fall. The plane groaned and complained, but slowly, miraculously it began to respond. The violent oscillations smoothed out. The terrifying lurching subsided into a manageable, if heavy, vibration. He had stabilized them. Logan watched, his arrogance completely stripped away, leaving only raw, naked awe. This old man. He wasn't just flying. He was communing with the aircraft. He seemed to feel its every strain, to anticipate its every complaint. He was using techniques that weren't in any commercial flight manual, tricks learned in a harder, faster, more lethal school of aviation. He was a relic, a fossil, and he was the most brilliant pilot Logan had ever seen. With the immediate threat of a spin averted, Samuel reached for the cabin intercom microphone. He pressed the button, and his voice, a bedrock of calm in an ocean of fear, filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Samuel Kent. I am in the cockpit. As you know, we have experienced a significant engine failure and a loss of hydraulic control. The situation is now stable. I am a licensed pilot, and we will be attempting an emergency landing at the nearest suitable airfield. Please remain in your seats, keep your oxygen masks on, and listen to the instructions of your outstanding cabin crew. We're going to get you home." He didn't offer false platitudes or cheap reassurances. He offered competence. And in that moment, it was more comforting than any prayer. A ripple of calm spread through the passenger cabin. The sobbing subsided. People looked at each other, a fragile seed of hope beginning to sprout in the barren landscape of their fear. They didn't know who Samuel Kent was, but they believed him. Their new stability, however, had come at a cost. In his fight to save the plane from the spin, Samuel had deviated drastically from their intended flight path. They were now miles off course, flying blind and, more importantly, silent. The initial explosion had fried their primary transponder. To air traffic control, Flight 714 had simply vanished from the radar, only to reappear as an unidentified, unresponsive bogey heading directly toward one of the most sensitive military airspaces in the country. Logan, his mind finally catching up to the situation, paled. "ATC," he stammered. "They don't know who we are. We're a ghost. They're going to scramble fighters." "I know," Samuel said grimly, already manipulating the radio, switching frequencies, trying to raise someone, anyone, on the emergency guard channel. "Mayday, mayday, mayday, this is Transair Flight 714. We have an engine out, severe control impairment. We are declaring an emergency and diverting to the nearest available runway. Requesting immediate assistance. Edwards Air Force Base, do you copy?" There was only static. He tried again. More static. Then, through the crackle, they saw them. 2 of them. They emerged from the clouds like sharks, sleek, gray, and utterly lethal, F-22 Raptors. They took up positions off either wing, their presence an immediate, overwhelming threat. The sheer power radiating from the fighter jets was palpable even through the thick cockpit glass. One of them was so close, Logan could see the pilot's helmeted head turn to look directly at them. The radio exploded to life, not with the calm cadence of ATC, but with the clipped, hard-edged tone of the military. "Unidentified aircraft. You are in restricted United States Air Force airspace. You are to immediately state your intentions and identify your pilot in command. Failure to comply will result in the use of deadly force. You have 60 seconds. The threat was not an exaggeration. Logan felt a cold dread wash over him. They were a commercial airliner full of innocent people, and they were seconds away from being shot out of the sky. He looked at Samuel, expecting to see fear. Instead, he saw a flicker of something else in those ancient blue eyes. Resignation, annoyance, and a deep, deep weariness. It was the look of a man who had been in this exact situation before. Samuel sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades. He keyed the microphone, his thumb steady on the button. "Control? This is the acting pilot of Transair 714. The captain is incapacitated. My name is Samuel Kent." He paused, and the air in the cockpit grew thick with tension. "My authorization to be in this airspace, it is under the call sign. Wraith." Silence. Not the silence of static or a lost connection. It was a profound, absolute silence on the other end of the radio. The world seemed to hold its breath. Logan stared at Samuel, confused. Wraith? It sounded like something out of a spy movie. A code word. A joke. The lead fighter pilot's voice finally came back on the line, but every trace of aggression was gone. It was replaced by something else. Disbelief, awe. "Sir? Say again your call sign?" The word "sir" was delivered with a level of deference that bordered on reverence. "My call sign is Wraith," Samuel repeated, his voice flat, emotionless. The word hung in the air, a key unlocking a door to a forgotten past. For Samuel, it wasn't just a word. It was his entire life in a single syllable. The cockpit of the Airbus melted away again, and he was back in the cold, dark stratosphere. The MiGs were scrambling below him, angry hornets trying to reach his altitude, but he was untouchable, a phantom in the upper atmosphere. He had been compromised. A spy satellite had tracked his trajectory, and now the entire Soviet air defense network was hunting for him. His mission had been simple. Fly over, let the belly of his plane drink in their secrets, and fly out without ever being seen. He was a ghost, a whisper, a wraith, his commander's voice, filtered through layers of encryption, had crackled in his ear. "They know you're there. We can't help you. You're on your own, Wraith. Godspeed." On his own. He'd pushed the experimental aircraft to its absolute limit, pulling it into an impossible climb, using the sun as his shield, becoming a ghost in the blinding glare. He had vanished. He had survived. He had completed the mission. He had been Wraith. A new voice suddenly blasted through the radio, overriding the channel. It was older, deeper, and carried the unmistakable weight of command. A voice used to moving armies. "Wraith, my God! This is General Thorne at NORAD. Colonel Samuel Kent, is that you?" Logan's head snapped toward the old man. "Colonel? General? What was happening?" Samuel allowed himself a small, weary smile. "It's just Samuel now, General. And I've got a bit of a situation up here." General Marcus Thorne's voice boomed over the frequency, now broadcasting on the open channel for the fighter pilots, for Logan, for anyone listening to hear. The general wasn't just talking, he was testifying. "Holy hell! Raptor 1, Raptor 2, this is General Thorne. You are to cease intercept protocols immediately. You will shift to escort formation. You are escorting a living legend." The general's voice was filled with a raw, unadulterated reverence that sent a shiver down Logan's spine. "Listen to me, all of you. In 1968, Colonel Samuel Wraith Kent flew a crippled experimental reconnaissance aircraft back from deep behind the Iron Curtain after his RIO was incapacitated by a cabin decompression. The mission was so secret, the plane so advanced, that to this day they are both officially listed as never existed. He flew for 8 hours with no navigation and half his controls shot out, evading 3 separate fighter patrols. He didn't just save himself. He saved the intelligence that asset was carrying, intelligence that averted a direct conflict and arguably saved thousands of lives. The general took a breath, his voice thick with emotion. His official record is clean, classified. But for those of us who know, he is credited with 0 aerial victories and 187 saves. That was the code number for the listening post in Turkey he protected by drawing enemy fire. The flight logs were burned. The records were buried. They made him a ghost. He is the Wraith. Now you give that man anything he damn well pleases, clear the skies for him. I want a 10-mile sterile corridor around that aircraft all the way to Edwards." Logan stared at the old man in the tweed jacket, the frail-looking passenger who he had berated and called Grandpa. A ghost. A legend. He wasn't just seeing an old man anymore. He was seeing a giant, hidden in plain sight. The F-22s, which moments before had been predators ready to strike, now moved with a fluid, practiced grace. They shifted their positions, leaving their threatening posture on the wings and taking up a formal honor guard escort, one slightly ahead, one slightly behind. It was the flying equivalent of a full-dress salute. Samuel, however, paid them no mind. His focus was singular. The runway at Edwards Air Force Base was a long, dark strip on the horizon. It was one of the longest runways in the world, a place designed for experimental aircraft and emergencies. But even 10,000 feet of concrete felt short when you were trying to land a 200-ton metal bird with no left-side hydraulics and only one functioning engine. He would have one shot at this. He turned to Logan, and his voice was no longer that of a commander, but of a teacher. "Son, I'm going to need your help. We have to land this thing like a glider. It's all about energy management. We come in too slow, we stall and drop like a rock. We come in too fast, we'll never stop. You need to be my eyes and my hands. I need you to handle the flaps, manual release, and call out our airspeed every 5 seconds on final approach. Can you do that?" Logan, humbled and broken down to his very core, could only nod. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate need to prove himself worthy of being in this cockpit. "Yes, sir, Colonel," he said, his voice quiet. "The name is Samuel," the old man corrected gently. "Now on my mark." The approach was the most terrifying 10 minutes of Logan's life. The aircraft felt heavy and unresponsive. Alarms they had silenced earlier began to shriek again as the landing gear lowered. The wind howled over the fuselage at a different pitch. "Airspeed 190, Logan called out, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Too fast," Samuel muttered, fighting the yoke. "Bring the flaps to 20. Flaps 20. Airspeed 185. The ground rushed up to meet them. Samuel's face was a mask of concentration, his eyes darting from the runway to the instruments, his feet playing a delicate tune on the rudder pedals. 170, we're in the pocket. Hold it there, son. Hold it right there." The tires hit the tarmac with a scream of tortured rubber. The plane slammed down hard, bouncing once, then twice, the force of the impact rattling every bone in their bodies. Samuel was a blur of motion, using the rudder and the reverse thrust of the single good engine to keep the massive plane from veering off the runway. Smoke billowed from the tires. The smell of burning rubber filled the cockpit. For what felt like an eternity, the plane kept rolling, eating up the concrete. Then, slowly, agonizingly, it began to bleed off speed. It rolled to a stop, the silence that followed the roar of the landing almost as shocking as the noise itself. They were down. They were safe. A beat of silence passed, then another. And then, from the cabin behind them, a sound began to build. It started as a few scattered claps, then grew into a wave of thunderous applause, cheers, and sobbing cries of relief. On the tarmac, a dozen fire trucks and ambulances raced toward them, their lights flashing. But there was another vehicle, a sleek black sedan, that pulled up right beside the cockpit. As the emergency slides deployed and the passengers began to evacuate, their faces streaked with tears of joy and terror. Logan turned to Samuel. His throat was tight. "Sir, Samuel, I don't know what to say. I was an arrogant fool." Samuel Kent finally let go of the yoke. He leaned back in the captain's chair, the exhaustion of the last hour and the last 50 years, settling deep into his bones. He reached over and placed a hand on the young co-pilot's shoulder. His grip was surprisingly firm. "You did good, son," he said, his voice kind. "When it mattered, you forgot about your pride and you did your job. Pride is a heavy thing to fly with. It adds weight you don't need, and it offers no lift. Remember that." The cockpit door was pulled open from the outside. A man in a crisp, 4-star general's uniform strode in. It was Marcus Thorne. He was tall and imposing, but his eyes were fixed on the old man in the captain's chair. He didn't offer a handshake. He stopped 3 feet away, brought his hand up to his brow, and delivered a long, perfect, heartbreakingly respectful salute. "Colonel Kent," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he didn't try to hide, "it is a profound honor to finally meet the ghost." Samuel offered a weary smile and a small nod of his head, a gesture that was both a return of the salute and a dismissal of the formality. "It's been a long time since I heard that name, Marcus. A very long time." The story of what had happened on Flight 714 spread like wildfire. The passengers, once safely on the ground, learned that the quiet old man in the tweed jacket was the one who had flown them through the gates of hell and back. News crews swarmed the airfield. But Samuel was already gone. General Thorne had escorted him away through a private exit, shielding him from the cameras and the questions. He didn't do it for the glory or the recognition. He did it because the plane was falling, and it was his duty to catch it. Weeks later, a small, unassuming package arrived at Logan Price's apartment. There was no return address. Inside, wrapped in simple brown paper, was a worn, leather-bound book. It was an old flight manual, the kind that hadn't been in print for half a century. The title on the cover was redacted with a thick black marker. Logan opened it. On the inside cover, in a neat, slightly shaky cursive, was a handwritten note. "Logan," it read. "The best pilots know the rules. The greatest pilots know when to break them. You have the makings of a great pilot. Just remember to keep your nose clean and your pride on the ground. It has no place in the sky. S.K." Logan ran his fingers over the inscription, the truth of the words settling deep in his soul. It wasn't about the uniform, the rank, or the age. It was about the character of the person wearing it. It was about the quiet competence that lay hidden beneath a surface the world was too quick to judge. We walk past heroes every single day, and we never even know it. They are the quiet grandfathers in the grocery store, the elderly women tending to their gardens, the old men sitting on park benches, their gazes fixed on a horizon only they can see. They don't wear capes or display their medals for all the world to admire. They wear worn tweed jackets and comfortable shoes. They carry the immense weight of their history not as a burden but as a quiet dignity in their eyes. They are the giants on whose shoulders our modern world was built. They are the wraiths among us, the ghosts of a braver time living out their days in the peaceful world they fought so hard to create. So the next time you encounter one, don't just see the wrinkles or the slow steps, look closer, see the steady hands that may have held the fate of nations. Look into their eyes and you might just see the reflection of a sky you've never known. You might just see a hero standing right there in front of you,